All right, I guess it's time for me to get my 2 cents in on the semi-annual, or perhaps it's at this point maybe bi-monthly, Starship Troopers discourse on Twitter, which I have observed as a spectator for the better part of a decade, and have never had an opinion on myself. I had never watched the film, never really had much interest in it. But after so many years of watching people go back and forth about this, and the left wing claiming that it validates and supports and confirms everything they believe, and the right wing also saying that it validates and supports everything they believe, I figured, you know what? Whatever this Rorschach test of a movie is, it's got to be somewhat interesting. So I finally sat down and watched the thing this morning, and I have to say, other than the eternal masterpiece, The Legend of the Galactic Heroes, this is definitely skyrocketed to the top of my list of like my favorite space sci-fi movies, or stories in general. Obviously, LOGH is not a movie. And so I will say I have never read the original book, never looked much into it. From what I understand, the film is a total departure from the book. The director did not like the original book, and he made this to sort of spit in the face of the author. I don't want to get into any of that. I'm not here to compare Starship Troopers, the movie, to Starship Troopers, the book. I'm not here to compare Starship Troopers in the context of the broader cinematic universe that it spawned, if you want to say, even though that is not a term that we would have used back in the 90s. But I think there were like 5 sequels that were all like direct to VHS or something. And I'm not even really going to analyze it as a film, a storytelling in the in the traditional sense. I'm mainly interested in the politics of this and trying to see how different people pull their political point of view from this story as it is presented by the film adaptation. And so I'm going to address this as if you have already seen it, because I think most people have. I think I was one of the few people who was interested in politics and has been a Twitter user for more than a decade who has not seen Starship Troopers until today. And so if you want a plot summary or something, go somewhere else. Watch the Red Letter Media review. They have a good video on this film. And so with all that preamble out of the way, I don't want to bury the lead, as I so often do in my unscripted ramblings. I don't use notes or a script on this channel, so oftentimes I can really bury my own point. But I want to make sure I get right out in front here, already over 3 minutes in, and say I do not think that this film effectively validates either the modern American left-wing or right-wing points of view. I know that's a big hot take in today's America to say Starship Troopers does not necessarily validate X point of view. But honestly, when I watched this, it felt timeless. This was not a story that necessarily, because a lot of people like to debate the lore of the film and say, who's the good guys, who's the bad guys, and usually it comes down, the right-wingers say that humanity are the unabashed heroes, and the left comes out and says that the bugs, or the arachnids, do you call arachnids bugs? Is that really correct? I don't know, they call them bugs in the movie, that the bugs are the good guys, and the humans are actually the bad guys. And we know this because they dressed Doogie Howser or Neil Patrick Harris in a Gestapo uniform, and so that's how you know that the humans are the bad guys. And so that's sort of like the monkey brain surface level left-wing point of view. Then you have the monkey brain surface level right-wing point of view, which is obviously the humans are the good guys, because look, they're fighting against bugs, literal bugs. They're insects. And there's a popular thread that's kicked off this latest debate on Twitter going around. In one of the tweets in that thread, the guy has a a picture of the bug brain, or the brain bug, I think they called it, from the end of the movie, and it says, hey, if you sympathize more with this face than with a human face, then you're a psychopath. And I hate to, at the risk of sounding like um, one of these arrogant left wingers who likes to use the word media literacy as a catch-all for shut up and accept my point of view over your own. I really think that focusing on how the bugs look somewhat misses the point. I think there is a point. I think that there is an intentionality behind the film adaptation making the bugs look completely inhuman and unrelatable. If they wanted to, they could have anthropomorphized these bugs. If the goal was to make the bugs sympathetic, if that was what the film wanted to do, they could have chosen to do that. I just watched recently Amazon's Invincible show, and in that there are these bug people who get killed, and you're supposed to feel bad for them. And they designed the bug people to have sort of a humanoid shape, although an obvious bug head. They kind of look like the guy from The Fly, the 1930s Fly, not the whatever year that came out, not the one with Jeff Goldblum. I've never seen that one, but the original Fly, the black and white one, kind of looks like that. It looks like although they don't have a human body, but they're standing upright, they're human height, and they've got a big giant like ant head, and of course they speak English. Those were bugs, yes. They were not human, but you were supposed to sympathize with them, so they made them somewhat relatable to a human audience. The bugs in Starship Troopers, they don't do that. And I think that the reason behind that is not necessarily that you're supposed to hate the bugs, just like the characters in the movie do. The movie, to me, seems very clearly to be told entirely from the point of view of our main character. We see the world as he sees it. There might be a lot going on in the world beyond what our main character perceives, but everything that we see is how he perceives it. People like to get into the lore and the world building to justify, why why one side is necessarily more righteous than the other. But that's not really that's not what the film is showing us. The film is showing us what was his name? Johnny Rico. It was Casper Van Dien's character. We're seeing his view of the world as someone who was presumably a high school student in Argentina, and who joined the military and went off to war. And so we are limited in the amount of information we get and what we get information about. There's a lot that we don't know. There's a lot more that we don't know in the film that could change. They could certainly change the interpretation, but that can't affect our interpretation of the film as it is, because that information is not there. So what we do know from the film is that our characters are facing an enemy that they neither can communicate with, relate to, or feel any sympathy towards. And so, by making the bugs look like that, you're underscoring that point. You're making it abundantly clear that the humans in the story do not see these bugs as like as peers. They don't see them as you would see necessarily another people who you've happened to come into conflict with. They don't see them as people. And so, oh gosh, now we're 10 minutes in. I still didn't get to my thesis. Okay, let me just come right out and say it. I think the brilliance of Starship Troopers is that it could be set. This same story with these same characters could be set in any time, in any place, in any reality or universe, realistic, fictional, fantastical, futuristic, anachronistic, a period film, you could set this story in Nazi Germany in the late 30s into World War II and not change a thing. All you would have to do is change, the visuals, essentially. You would have to change some names. And the story would function just fine. The characters would be just as likable, or they should be. Although inherent biases against, let's say, biases against Nazi Germany, I think would make a lot less people in their head. It would make them unable to relate to Johnny Rico if Johnny Rico was a literal Nazi with a swastika armband. But as far as this story is concerned, it doesn't matter what the form of government is. It doesn't matter what the ideology is, because Johnny Rico doesn't believe in any ideology. He doesn't believe in anything except for fighting for his friends and survival. And so it doesn't matter if the Federation in Starship Troopers is some totalitarian, nightmare state, because we don't see any of that. Could it be? Could you argue? Oh, well, in the lore, you see, this is a terrible, evil, fascist regime. Okay, that doesn't change the film because that's not in the film. All that's in the film that we know is only people who have served in the military can vote. That's like the only thing we know about the Federation's politics. That and they hate bugs. Okay, so only veterans can vote, and there's a clear enemy. We know who the enemy is. You can change who the enemy is, and change the name of the enemy, change the name of the Federation. This could be any martial society. And I think that the fact that so many people come away with different interpretations is a testament to the skill with which this film was crafted. Because it's not beating you over the head with a clear message. As much as the left would like to argue, it's beating you over the head with the message that Trump supporters are evil. Believe it or not, Trump didn't even exist as a political entity when this film was made. So I guarantee you, Paul Verhoeven was not trying to warn you about Trump. Obviously, though, with choices in the film and the words of the director and other people who worked on the film, we do know that they employed fascist imagery, and that this was supposed to be something negative. This was supposed to represent, a darkness in the story, which I think it does well, because this is a fairly dark story. It has a lot of lighthearted moments. It has some jokes. It has a good bit of irony to it, but it's no comedy. And it's also not a conventional hero's journey, because this is not a happy story. It doesn't have a happy ending, but it's a very human story. There was never a moment, and granted this was my first viewing, so I mean, as on multiple views, I'm sure I will be more scrutinous and perhaps be able to pick out little things. But the fact that I was able to watch through this whole movie and not look at any character and go, wait, why did you just do that? That doesn't make any sense. I never did that, which to me, generally, this is a sign that these characters are written like actual human beings. But these are not exemplars. These are not people who make perfect decisions at all. They're all imperfect. And so, there is no strong sense of justice here. There's no Luke Skywalker in this story. And I feel like the people on the right try to put this film in that kind of a box, because the people who tend to praise this movie the most that I've seen on the right also tend to be the kind of people who hate things that are morally gray, and I fail to see how this is not a morally gray film. Although I would accept the argument that Verhoeven's attempt at making this less of a black and white story and more of a morally gray one falls flat a bit. Like there's the shining example of the child soldiers at the end. That's a very clear, like, he's throwing in, oh, this isn't good. And then you've got Barney, Doogie Howser, Neil Patrick Harris, whatever his name is. He certainly seems to come across as a bad guy who does not value individual human life and is willing to break a few eggs to make an omelet. We get that scene with him. But you can still have a good story that is fundamentally positive, that has a positive message in this sort of a context, with some less ethical characters, with some guys who are more in the morally gray area. So, for example, I would not call Johnny Rico a morally gray character. He is a very black and white person, and his view, his lens that he looks at this world through is what colors most of the story, and there's only a bit of that gray that leaks through. And so at the end of the day, I think that's what makes this so interesting. Because it's subtle, because it's not beating you over the head with that. It's just introducing little hints here. Because what this is doing is it's planting the seeds. It's not outright telling you, okay, humanity's bad, bugs good. Like I said, it does not give us enough information for that. But it just gives us these little hints that sort of open the door that, you know what, maybe everything that humanity's got going on, maybe it's not all 100% on the up and up. And so these are things that you can ignore if you're someone like Johnny Rico, because these are things that he saw that he was able to ignore and not necessarily tip him off and change his, the course of his life. But we, the audience, are able to have a different interpretation. And so, no, I disagree with that original thread that said this is a failed satire because it doesn't make the message super clear. I praise films that are not beating me over the head with their message. If it's still a good movie. I mean, if you just are an unclear mess and also a mess of a story with messy characters that don't make sense, then I'm not going to praise that. But when you have a well-crafted story with well-defined characters who go on, interesting character arcs, and at the end of the day, you can pull different messages out of the film. That, to me, is a timeless portrait of real life, because that is the story of the human race. I think that if you tried to do this same story, like I said, set in Nazi Germany, you could pull it off. It would be just as good. But the audience reaction to it would overwhelmingly be, oh, well, these are Nazis, so they're the bad guys. But if you changed Johnny Rico to be Johann Reichardt or something, made him German, put him in the 1930s, from the perspective of a young Wehrmacht volunteer, the mission of the Wehrmacht could, and I'm sure did, appear just as righteous as the mission of the mobile infantry appeared to Johnny Rico. And so I'm glad that the film does not waste time trying to beat into our head that the Federation are bad guys. Because they don't have to be. The point is that they could be. And if they were, it would not be directly relevant to the story of Johnny Rico. Soldiers do not get immersed most of the time in abstract political debates. They live in the here and now. It's a very much in the weeds sort of lifestyle. And I say this as someone who would never join any military, no interest in it. I don't want that. And that's because I'm unable to separate myself in my mind from the broader abstract political debate. But the point is, soldiers do. That is their nature. You know, Johnny Rico sounds very similar to Johnny Reb. I think it's supposed to be. I don't know if that was a direct homage to Johnny Reb, but it's a common name. It's he was a football player, which I guess they have arena football in the future. It doesn't have to be football. It could be soccer. It could be baseball. It could be some alien game we've never heard of. But the point is, Johnny Rico could have been your son, could have been your brother, could have been your father. And he grew into a trained soldier who lived to kill. I know I focused on Johnny because he is our main character, but the same goes for the other characters in this story. They are all people who could have lived in any age or in any place. And so before I go, I want to get to the matter of the bugs. Why it is so... why I think it's such an interesting decision to make the bugs as alien and inhuman as they are. And then I want to discuss the last scene of the movie, which I have purposefully avoided up until this point. The bugs, as I discussed earlier, are completely inhuman because we are seeing things through Johnny's perspective. And as a naive young man joining the military, that is how you see the enemy. That is how you have to see the enemy, because you cannot feel any remorse, you cannot feel any hesitation when you get on the battlefield. That is one of the biggest problems that they have with new recruits in any military, is that it's difficult for them to get their first kill, because when they come face to face with another human being, it's very difficult to pull the trigger. And so eventually you have to get to the point in your mind where you dehumanize those people and you don't see them as your fellow man. Starship Troopers just skips that by making the enemy visually completely inhuman. But once an enemy is dehumanized, you could substitute the bugs for any other race, human or otherwise. You could substitute them for humanoid aliens that may have a form that is more familiar to a human boy like Johnny Rico, or you could substitute it for a human from another country, or even from within his own country. You could substitute the bugs for rival gang members. You could tell this story in an infinite number of settings. But the bugs just add to the exaggeration of the presentation of this film. Everything is loud. Everything is in your face. Except for the message. Or I should say, except for maybe the political message. I don't care if Paul Verhoeven says that the whole point of the movie was supposed to be about fascism. There was very little fascism in it beyond his wardrobe choices. Fascism's a very specific concept that is closely associated with a very specific time in history. And so I don't know why it would be beneficial to anyone to argue that the film is actually not timeless, that it is very much contemporary to 1930s politics, when through the eyes of our main character we don't see much in the way of politics. We see that a sky marshal loses his job and is replaced by a woman of color. That's what we get in terms of our political fascism. But getting back to the bugs, they can be replaced with any enemy. The bugs could be Jews if you wanted. If you wanted to make this about Nazi Germany. Again, the film would still not be specific to fascism, because you could easily set this during the time of the Roman Empire and make the bugs barbarians. You could make the Federation World War II America and make the bugs the Japanese. You could make the bugs Germans if you're talking about World War I America. I can go on like this all day. Because from the perspective of a bright-eyed, naive young soldier, and even an embattled, battle-hardened, loyal soldier beyond that, that is what the enemy is. Their lives are as valuable as bugs. After all, that was, for those of you who remember L.A. Noire, remember that was Cole Phelps's big problem as an officer in World War II. is that in his mind he humanized the Japanese enemy too much, and that made it difficult to operate as a soldier. Oh, I almost forgot. So let's go through the ending, the last scene. It was something that was specifically cited by a lot of people, starting with that thread that I mentioned, which I guess I'll link to it. I don't know if it really matters, because there's so many people talking about it, and this discourse has gone on for so long. I don't want to make this a response video to one particular thread. This is just my thoughts on everyone's thoughts on Starship Troopers. Anyway, the last scene of the movie features what they call a brain bug, some kind of bug that I guess gives orders to others and does a lot of the thinking. And it's drug out of a cave by Clancy Brown's character and Doogie Howser, Barney, Neil Patrick Harris, who is a psychic. This doesn't get discussed much in the movie because it's not super relevant to the story of Johnny Rico, but yes, he is a psychic, Neil Patrick Harris, and so he walks over and puts his hand on the brain bug, and he's asked by someone I presume to be one of his commanders, what's it thinking? And he holds there, and there's all silence in the crowd, and he's pondering, and he's got it, squinting a little bit, and he turns back to everyone, and he shouts, "It's afraid," which I think is probably the biggest revelation of the entire movie. The bug is afraid. It feels fear. It was just sitting there, watching everyone around it stare at it, because it was all tied up, and it was just sitting there. And the crowd of soldiers erupts in cheers. And it's not like it wasn't like they didn't feel like the bloodthirsty cheers of like an angry mob, like, yeah, they didn't sound angry. They sounded happy, which is very off-putting. They were happy and excited that this thing felt fear. And so this is something that Johnny witnesses, and then he joins in cheering for it. But we as the audience get a bit of a hint that, wait, we think of these things as simple insects. Why does it have fear? What is it afraid of? What's it think? Well, does it think other things? Does this being have intelligence? Can we communicate with it? Could we negotiate? Could we settle our differences through argumentation, through debate? But when you're a soldier, these are not things. It's not your job to think about these things. Your job is to kill the enemy. And that's what the soldiers have in mind. And so to them, it is not some big revelation that, oh my gosh, this bug, it's capable of fear. So it knows that it's in danger. And, and that's because of us. They don't think that deeply about it. They just think, oh, the enemy's afraid. This is good. I'm doing my job. It has no deeper implications for them. Now imagine that same scene playing out with a human in place of the bug. A human that our new character, someone who is in place of Johnny Rico, instead of Johnny Rico, let's say he's a World War II Japanese soldier. Let's call him Jun Ryunosuke or something. That's kind of hard to say, but I wanted to keep the same initials. Anyway, so Jun is in a crowd of Japanese soldiers watching a Chinese colonel, let's say, being drugged, all tied up, drugged out of a cave that he was hiding in. And nobody can understand him because no one speaks Chinese, and some bilingual officer, intelligence officer, walks over and listens to what the Chinese officer is saying, or stand-in for the brain bug. And he reports back to the rest of the crowd of Japanese soldiers, he's afraid. And the whole crowd cheers, erupts in cheers of joy. I think that scene would have a very different effect on the audience. I think that the audience of the film would be much more disturbed by that than if they see it as a bug. But what you have to understand is that uh, in our in our hypothetical character Jun Ryunosuke, um, in his mind, that Chinese kernel is no different than the brain bug is in the mind of Johnny Rico. And so the point is not that you're supposed to get out of the movie that the bugs are good people. Obviously, no. The way that the film presents them, they're they are vermin. They're beneath vermin. They're insects. They are bugs. But in another context, that could easily those bugs could easily be human beings, and a soldier like Johnny Rico would see them no differently. Unless you wrote him as a different character, of course. But he and the rest of the soldiers would view the enemy no differently than they view these bugs. Because at the end of the day, an enemy is an enemy. In fact, you could come out and say, well, actually, the bugs are a visual metaphor. The bugs really were another race of human beings the entire time. Would not change the story a bit. At least not the story of the film. The books, I'm sure he picked bugs for a reason, because he wanted it to make sure that this is a very black and white story. And the original author probably did not want people to, the audience, to at all sympathize with the enemy of the humans. And so I think that the film appropriates that same motif for a different purpose. And so I would love, as an experiment, if I were a filmmaker, to do a remake or reimagining of Starship Troopers with the exact same, as close to the same script as possible. Obviously, you would have to adapt it to whatever time and whatever place you're in. Make it sound like it's supposed to be there. Remove all references to the Federation and bugs specifically. Maybe you could leave in a couple of, a couple of uses of the word bugs to refer to the enemy, just as a wink and a nod. But make the same movie with all human characters. I'd be interested how that would land with audiences. And so, finally, I guess I'll get to what I took away from the film. What message I got out of it. And to me, it was not a message that would be that the message that I got out of it. Perhaps this is something that Paul Verhoeven would be angry at. Maybe he wouldn't like what I got out of this, and I know that most of the left-wing fans of Starship Troopers would not like what I got out of this. But what I got was a sort of universal respect for men and women who have to engage in armed combat, for people who have to fight in wars, no matter what their side was, no matter what their cause supposedly was. And this isn't the first story that has given me that impression. I try to be as open-minded as I can with trying to understand people who fight for causes that I vehemently disagree with. Because at the end of the day, every individual who fights on either side of any war has their reasons, and their reasons are logical to them in their heads. And so Johnny Rico is a tale. His story within Starship Troopers is a tale of how easily a soldier or a young man can be roped into warfare, and how that does not make him a political ideologue or someone who even knows much about what's going on. And ultimately, every veteran of every military throughout human history is a victim to some extent of the horrors of war. Even if, let's say, they individually perpetrated more horrors than were perpetrated against them. Let's say that they pillaged other villages more than their own home was pillaged. They were still shaped by those experiences. And the mindset is the same. I think that Johnny Rico turning to the camera and saying, I'm from Buenos Aires, and I say, kill every bug, kill every last one of them. It was prophetic when you look just a few years later at 9/11, because that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what young men said as they signed up to go off to war. Completely different circumstances, but the same result, the same conclusion. And so, yes, I think that there is a certain moral equivalency between soldiers. Not between individual soldiers, but between classes of soldiers. I find it difficult to say that the average Wehrmacht soldier was more righteous than the average American soldier, or that the average Italian was more righteous than the average, what did the Brits call them? Not bobbies, that's Tommies? Is that what the Brits called their soldiers? Friggin' weirdos. Or that the average Japanese soldier was more righteous than the average Chinese, or less righteous, whatever. Well, wherever you want to draw the line, even if you think that one side had a more righteous cause. That's not usually what's going through the mind of individual soldiers. Obviously, the classic example that for some reason keeps needing to be brought up is the Confederacy. And yes, I did notice that Jake Busey was playing Dixie on his fiddle in Starship Troopers. That was a nice nod there. I'm sure the left is going to tell me, obviously that means that the Federation are the bad guys because they play Dixie on the fiddle in the presence of a black person who didn't seem very offended. In fact, he danced along to it. Do you believe that? Paul Verhoeven, that virulent racist, he made a black man dance to Dixie. And so I will just finish this off by saying I thought that this was a brilliant film. I will watch it many more times in my life. And I think that people who stop at just calling this and saying, well, you shouldn't overthink it. This is just it's just a cheesy, fun war movie about people shooting bugs. I think they're just missing out. Because there's so much more to appreciate here. I'm not going to say they're media illiterate. I just think that stopping there and not wanting to take it any deeper is a wasted opportunity, because most films are not very deep. Most of them you're not going to get a lot out of, especially anything positive. But you know what? I was never someone who liked getting engrossed in universes anyway. And if you're more interested in the world building and stuff like that, well, you're not going to try and take the story out of itself and look at it in a broader context of the human race. And so I understand that is something more enjoyable for a lot of people. Also, one last note, not something I've thought too much about yet, but I did notice that throughout the film, the people who died, people who were killed off, those characters tended to have more righteous motivations. Like the woman who joined because she thought it would help her chances of being able to get a license to bear children. And oh, you know what? I forgot about that. Yeah, you know what? That's a good example of the Federation in universe being pretty evil. But again, these are only little bit of touches of politics that we get, and it's something that in Johnny's mind probably he glazed right over and didn't even think about. Just like, and that's how it's presented in the film. It's a throwaway line. It's like, oh, I joined because I thought it would help my chances of getting a license to have babies, because I want to be a mother. I had to join the military because I want to be a mother. Like that is just such a screwed up, like backward line that shouldn't come out of any character's mouth, yet that is the world in which this is set. And of course she gets brutally killed by a bug later on. Then you had the farmer boy who gets shot in the back of the head doing in a training exercise. He just didn't want to be a farmer, so he's like, well, what can I do other than be a farmer? I'm poor. I guess I'll go to I guess I'll go join the military. And then there was another guy, I don't know if I saw him get killed, who got into Harvard, but he couldn't afford it. So he said, well, I'm going to go fight bugs. And then I'll be able to pay for my Harvard. Oh, and then finally there was the woman who went into the military because, she wanted to become a politician. That's right. All these people end up getting killed. The folks who survive, Jake Busey, who ends up surviving, says, well, he wants to be a career officer. He wants to be able to command people and be a leader. And so it's like, well, he's the only person who really seems interested in the military. He is the first one, it seems, to give up on that because he gets a little bit of leadership, makes a mistake, things don't go well, he freezes, and so he says, you know what, I'm just going to be a grunt for the rest of my life. He survives to the end of the movie. Denise Richards' character, who I think intentionally is not very likable. She's very selfish. She's happy to use Johnny Rico for entertainment while she's in high school, but doesn't, is not at all interested in trying to stay together with him. Her goal is to become a pilot. She doesn't care whether he gets into, the military or not, in the Fleet Academy or whatever. She doesn't give a damn. Johnny Rico desperately joins the military, just trying to stay close to her. And after he joins the military, she says, you know what, I think we should see other people because, I'm a pilot now, and I'm not going to have time to be around someone like you. And the film makes you think, oh, well, she's going to just, screw Johnny, figuratively. Go away, Johnny. I'm going to be with this other football player who, was your rival in high school. And she doesn't even do well by that guy. They don't seem to have any sort of relationship other than just coworkers. And he ends up dying to save her. And so he seems like a decent enough sort. And so out of all these people, the ones who end up surviving are our original three. Johnny Rico, who is directionless, really doesn't have anything that he lives for, that he cares about in his own life. All that's gone. All that he has is the mobile infantry. Then you have the psychic Nazi guy. Not that he does any Nazi stuff, but he's dressed like a Nazi. Neil Patrick Harris's character, he's around at the end, and then you have Denise Richards. And so all of these other characters who had, and then there was Diz, who joined the mobile infantry as a woman to try and be near, specifically the mobile infantry, which is like the bottom of the barrel. You don't want to get into infantry. That's where you get into placed if you can't get anything else. She joined that just to be with Johnny. So she was very much contrasting with Denise Richards' character. She was someone who was willing to make a sacrifice for the chance of trying to have a relationship. She made the same sacrifice that Johnny was willing to make for, what was her name even? Carmen. And so she does something righteous, and of course she ends up getting killed as well. And so by the end of the film, Johnny just turns into his old teacher, who was a crotchety warmonger type, who was ready to die at any moment, and didn't really value human life as such. He was someone who shot one of his own soldiers because he was wounded, and so he just shot him and killed him. And when he was wounded himself, lost half his body, he asked Johnny to kill him. After he's dead, pretty much Johnny takes on this guy's persona. Hard for me to say that, by the end of the movie, Johnny became this great guy. I think he was a bit more likable and relatable at the beginning. Perhaps that's controversial of me. But by the end, he is essentially a militaristic android. He doesn't have any values of his own other than just, keep fighting until I die. That's Johnny's character by the end, pretty much hollowed out. Carmen ends up just being a careerist. She wanted to be able to be the captain of a ship. Well, guess what? She got to be the captain of a ship. That was her big goal. And then you have Neil Patrick Harris, who continues to rise within the ranks of the intelligence community. And so this is what's left as war grinds down on a society. You lose the people who want to be mothers. You lose the people who want to be, wives and companions. You lose the people who want to, for better or for worse, go into politics, make the world a better place. Even though I think politicians are bad people, I think that character in the context of the story, the girl who wanted to grow up and go into politics, I think she was supposed to represent something positive. She was supposed to represent someone who was thinking about broader society and how to improve it. Even if you say, oh, well, if she really did that, it wouldn't end up well. Okay. And then you have the farmer boy who just wanted to get off the farm. Is that so much to ask? He just wanted to get off the farm. It was pretty innocent. He ends up getting shot in the back of the head. The kid who couldn't afford to go to college, I believe, also dead. All these normal, relatable people all die off one by one. And the ones who are left are just the least virtuous among them. That's what's left of human society. And so I think this will end up being my longest video in the history of this channel. But there's a lot to say, and again, this was without notes. I'm sure if I took notes, perhaps, if I did a second watch through taking notes, I could go on for much longer and perhaps structure some kind of actual argument about this film. So with that said, I will see you folks back here next time.